The ship was dying. Captain Aro stood in the middle of the command deck of the Velani research vessel, gentle whisper, and watched the lights flicker one by one. The emergency power was holding, but barely. Red warning lights painted everything in a sick, bloody glow that made her pale blue skin look almost purple. Her 4 arms hung at her sides. 2 of them were shaking. She told herself it was the cold. The heating systems had failed 20 minutes ago, and the temperature inside the ship was dropping fast. It was not the cold. Through the observation window, she could see them, 14 ships arranged in a loose ring around her crippled vessel, like predators circling a wounded animal. They were Gra's ships, ugly, brutal things made of dark metal and sharp angles, now covered in spikes and sensor arrays that looked like the eyes of insects. Each one was at least 3 times the size of the gentle whisper. The largest, the command ship at the center of the formation, was 10 times bigger. Its name, translated roughly into galactic common, was the collector's prize. The Gras were slavers. Everyone in the galaxy knew this. They raided the edges of civilized space, took whoever they could grab, and sold them to the highest bidder in markets that officially did not exist. They were strong, fast, and covered in natural armor, thick plates of chitin that could stop a lowered energy bolt. They stood 8 feet tall on average, had 6 limbs and compound eyes that could see a near total darkness. They were by any reasonable measure monsters, and they had found the gentle whisper alone out in the middle of nowhere with no weapons, no escort, and no way to run. R closed her large dark eyes and took a slow breath. She was a scientist. She had spent her entire career studying deep space organisms in the cold reaches between star systems. She had never fired a weapon. She had never been in a fight. She had 43 crew members on this ship, and every single one of them was looking at her right now, waiting for her to do something, to say something, to fix this. She had nothing. The grass had hit them 6 hours ago, dropping out of faster than light travel in a flash of distorted space, and immediately opening fire, not to destroy. The shots had been precise, surgical. They had targeted the FTL drive first, then the main engines, then the long-range communication array. The gentle whisper was not a military ship. It had no shields worth mentioning. The shots had torn through the hull like claws through paper. 3 crew members had died in the first 30 seconds, pulled into the vacuum through hull breaches before the emergency seals could close. After that, the Gras had simply waited. They had sent a single message in broken galactic common, the shared language of the galaxy's many species. The message was simple: you stop, you wait, we come. Take, you fight, all die, you not fight. Some live choose. Etha had chosen to wait, not because she was a coward, but because she had 40 crew members still alive and fighting. The Gras with a science vessel was not fighting, it was suicide. So she waited and she thought. And she tried to find a way out. There was no way out, Captain, said a voice from behind her. It was small and scared, and it cracked on the second syllable. Ira turned to see Sulith, her youngest communications officer, standing at the remains of the comm station. Sulith was barely an adult by Velani standards, thin with wide eyes that were even wider than usual right now, and hands that trembled as they moved across the broken console. Captain, I think I can do something. The comms array is destroyed, Ether said. She tried to keep her voice steady. She did not entirely succeed. You cannot send a message, not through the main array, Sula said. She pulled a panel off the console and reached inside, her small fingers working quickly among the wires and circuits. But the secondary backup, the emergency pulse transmitter, it runs on a separate power line. The Graz hit the main antenna one time, but the pulse transmitter uses a different system. It is short range normally, but if I reroute the power from the life support back up and push everything through the transmitter at once, I can send a single broadband burst, one message in every direction as far as the power will carry it. How far? Sulith hesitated. Maybe 40 light years, maybe more. It depends on how much power I can pull. 40 light years in the vast emptiness of the core expanse. That was both a lot and nothing at all. The expanse was a region of space between three major galactic territories, unclaimed, ungoverned, and largely empty. It was the reason the gentle whisper had been here in the first place. The deep space organisms Ara studied thrived in places like this, far from the noise and energy of civilization. It was also the reason that grass hunted here. No laws, no patrols, no witnesses, but 40 light years might reach the edge of someone's territory. It might reach a relay station, a patrol ship, a listening post. It might reach someone who could help. Do it, Ether said. Sulith nodded and went to work. Her hand stopped shaking as she focused on the task. This was what she was good at. Machine signals, the language of electrons and waves. The world outside was terrifying, but the world inside the console made sense. She rerouted power lines, bypassed damaged circuits, and jury-rigged connections that no engineering manual would approve of. It took her 20 minutes. When she was done, she looked up at Ara. I need you to record the message, Captain. I can only send it once. After this, the transmitter will burn out. Ethra nodded. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and spoke into the recorder in Galactic Common. She gave their ship name, their species, their coordinates, and the nature of their situation. She described the Graz force. 14 ships heavily armed. She described the damage to her vessel. She described the 3 crew members already dead and the 40 still alive. And then at the end, she added something that was not tactical, not strategic, not useful in any practical way. She added a plea to any who hear this message. We are taken. We cannot fight. We cannot run. We are scientists, not soldiers. There are 40 of us still alive. Please, if anyone is listening, please respond. Sulith sent the message. The transmitter screamed with power for exactly 1.4 seconds. He pushing the signal out in a sphere of electromagnetic energy that expanded at the speed of light in every direction. Then the transmitter died. Exactly as Sulith had predicted. Its circuits fused and melted. The message was gone. It was out there now, racing through the void, and there was nothing more they could do but wait. They did not have to wait long for the Graz. 2 hours after the signal was sent, the Graz boarding parties arrived. They came in armored shuttles that latched onto the gentle Whisper's hull like parasites, cutting through the outer plating with plasma torches. The Vayani crew heard them coming, the grinding, screeching sound of metal being torn apart, and gathered in the main cargo bay. As Ara had ordered, there was nowhere to hide, and fighting was pointless. The best they could hope for was to stay together. And stay alive, the first grasp through. The door was enormous, it had to duck to fit through the frame, and even then, its shoulder plates scraped the sides. It was covered head to foot in dark rig kitten, and it carried a weapon that looked like it had been designed to kill things much larger than Villani. Behind it came more 10, 20, 30 Graz warriors, filling the cargo bay with the sound of their clicking mandibles and the heavy thud of their armored feet, and behind them all came Scathus. Scathus the collector was not the largest Graz in the room, but he was by far the most terrifying. He moved with a slow, confident ease that spoke of absolute power. His kitten was darker than the others, almost black and covered in scars that he wore like decorations. His compound eyes swept the room, taking in the huddled Villani crew with a calm appraisal of a merchant examining goods. He stopped in front of Athara. She forced herself to look up at him. He was nearly 3 times her height. Captain Ska said his galactic common was better than the message had suggested. Much better. You are the leader of these creatures. I am good. Then you understand what happens now. I understand what you want to happen, Ether said. Her voice was steady this time. Something about facing the worst things she could imagine had burned away. The trembling, I do not agree to it. Skews made a sound that might have been laughter. It sounded like rocks grinding together. Agreement is not required. You are cargo now, all of you Villani. Fetch good prices. You are small. You are obedient. You have 4 arms for working, very popular with buyers. He turned and gestured to his warriors. Begin sorting. Healthy ones in the first group, injured in the second, dead weight gets left behind. The Graz moved through the Villani crew like farmers sorting livestock. They grabbed crew members by the arms, examined their teeth, tested the flexibility of their limbs. Those who resisted were struck not hard enough to cause permanent damage, because damaged goods were worth less, but hard enough to make it clear that resistance was meaningless. Ether was grabbed, examined, and thrown to the ground. When she tried to pull away, Grask boot pressed down on her back, pinning her to the cold deck. She lay, their cheek against the metal floor, and stared at the wall and thought about the signal she had sent, and wondered if anyone had heard it, and if they had, whether they cared. Far away the signal traveled. It reached the nearest major power first, the Conclave of Enlightened Worlds, a coalition of over 200 species that considered itself the moral and intellectual center of galactic civilization. The Conclave had the largest fleet in the quadrant, the most advanced technology, and a bureaucracy so vast that it had its own gravitational pole. The signal was received by listening post on the edge of Conclave space. The operator on duty logged it, flagged it, and forwarded it to the Regional Emergency Response Coordinator. The coordinator reviewed it and forwarded it to the Central Emergency Committee. The committee held a meeting. The meeting lasted 4 hours. At the end of the meeting, a subcommittee was formed to review the jurisdictional implications of intervention in unclaimed territory. The subcommittee was given a deadline of 10 standard days to produce a report. Within 6 hours of receiving the signal, the Conclave had logged it, discussed it, filed it, and moved on. No ships were sent. No rescue was planned. The Karath expanse was outside their territory, and intervening would set a precedent that might obligate them to intervene in future. Incidents, the cost-benefit analysis did not support action. The signal reached the Thalari hegemony next. The Thalari were a species of tall, thin beings with silver skin and a culture built entirely around trade, profit, and economic calculation. They ran the largest commercial network in the galaxy. They were not cruel, they simply saw everything, including life, watched in terms of value. A Thalari intelligence analyst reviewed the distress call and prepared a brief for the hegemony's Strategic Commerce Council. The brief included an estimate of the military cost of a rescue operation, the economic value of a Vellani science crew, and the potential diplomatic benefits of intervention. The numbers did not add up. A rescue would cost more than the Vanni were worth, and the Vanni had nothing of significant trade value to offer. Return, the hegemon sent a formal diplomatic communication to the Vellani government expressing deep concern for the safety of their citizens and offering to assist with negotiations for their release through appropriate diplomatic channels. Everyone who read the message understood what it actually meant. The Thalari were not coming. The Rathani collective received the signal. Third, the Rathani were an insectoid hive mind species that operated on pure collective logic. They assessed the signal, determined that the Vellani were not members of their collective and therefore not their responsibility. They did not reply. They did not even acknowledge receipt. One by one, the signal reached other civilizations. The Dethani, the Poli, the Jun-KTH, the Orvani Federation, the Melari Republic. 27 species in total received the distress call from the Gentle Whisper. 27 species heard a ship full of scientists begging for their lives. 27 species did the math, checked their policies, consulted their lawyers, weighed the costs and the risks, and decided, each in their own way for their own reasons, that it was not their problem. When none of them responded, the signal kept traveling. It grew weaker as it spread, the energy thinning as it expanded across the vast emptiness of space. By the time it reached the outer edge of its range, it was barely more than a whisper, a faint, garbled fragment of data that most receivers would dismiss as background noise. But there was a listening post on the edge of a young species territory, a small automated relay station anchored to an asteroid, bristling with antenna arrays and powered by a compact fusion reactor. The station was not elegant or advanced by galactic standards. It was, in fact, rather crude, bolted together with visible seams, covered in warning labels, in a language that no other species the galaxy could read, and running on software that was updated far more often than its hardware. When the station's designation was Outpost Echo 7, it belonged to the United Earth Navy. The signal arrived at Echo 7 at 3:47 hours station time. The automated systems almost discarded it. The signal was weak, fragmented, and encoded in a format that the station's software did not natively recognize, but the UEN had learned in its relatively short time. Among the stars that signals from unknown sources in empty space were worth paying attention to. A subruine flagged the transmission, ran it through a translation algorithm, and forwarded the decrypted result to the nearest man facility. That facility was Anchor Station Thermopylae. The humans had named their stations after battles. Other species found this unsettling. The Humans did not seem to understand why. At Thermopylae, the signal arrived on the desk of a communications technician named Petty Officer Reeves. Reeves read the decrypted message once, then read it again. Then she picked up the internal comm and called the watch commander. "Ma'am," she said, and her voice was flat and professional in the way that military people are trained to be when they are trying very hard not to feel what they are feeling. "You need to see this." The watch commander that night was Commander Lena Vasquez. Vasquez was 43 years old with short black hair streamed naturally in an expression that most species in the galaxy would describe as intimidating. She had been in the United Earth Navy for 22 years. She had fought in the border wars, the Kepler Station incident, when the engagement at TD that people still did not like to talk about. She was good at her job. She was tired. She was halfway through a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been recycled from engine coolant, which, given the state of Thermopylae's water filters, was not entirely impossible. She read the signal. She read it again. She put down her coffee. "Reeves," she said, "what's the source verification on this? Signal origin matches Korath. Expanse, ma'am. Coordinates check out. Species ID is Vanny. There are no non-hostile research species flagged in our database. The signal encoding matches emergency protocols and the aggressor's grasp, ma'am, based on the description. 14 ship slaver configuration." The room got very quiet. Everyone on Thermopylae knew what the Gras were. Every human who served in this part of space knew what the Gras were. 2 years ago, the Gras had taken the Stellan Hope, a colony transport carrying 216 civilians, including 47 children. By the time the UEN had responded, the ship was a gutted wreck drifting in space. The colonists were gone, all of them. Intel suggested they had been sold into slavery across a dozen different markets. In the galactic underworld, 47 children gone. The UEN had never found them. It was an open wound that had never healed, a quiet fury that lived in the bones of every sailor and marine who served on the frontier. It was the reason standing Order 71 existed. Vasquez stared at the signal for a long time. Then she looked up. "Get me Fleet Ops," she said, "and wake up Colonel Chen, or tell him his Marines have a job." She picked up her coffee again, took a sip, and stared out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, 40 scientists were waiting for someone to come. Vasquez intended to be that someone. The Vianney had sent their distress call to the galaxy and begged for help from anyone who was listening. They had hoped for the Conclave with its vast fleets and noble ideals. They had hoped for the Thulari with its endless resources. They had hoped for any of the great ancient civilized powers of the galaxy to hear their cry and answer it. Instead, their signal had reached the human, a species that had been in space for barely 2 centuries, a species that most of the galaxy regarded as dangerous, unpredictable, and slightly insane. When a species that came from a world so hostile that the Galactic Biological Survey had classified it as a Category 12 death world, a planet where everything, including the weather, the wildlife, the geology, and the other humans, was actively trying to kill you at all times, a species that had in its short and violent history among the stars developed a reputation for one very specific thing. When humans heard someone screaming for help, they came running, And they did not stop until the screaming stopped. The Vayani did not know this yet. They would learn. Commander Lena Vasquez had not slept 19 hours, and she was not going to sleep for a long time yet. That was fine. She had gone longer without sleep before, and for worse reasons. At least this time she was not trying to hold a damaged ship together with emergency patches and willpower. This time she was doing something she understood. She was building a fist. The operation center of Anchor Station Thermop was a large room buried in the center of the station, behind layers of armor plating and blast doors. It was not a beautiful room. It had bare metal walls, harsh white lighting, and rows of workstations covered in screens and holographic displays. It smelled like recycled air, old coffee, and stress. It was the kind of room where decisions were made that decided whether people lived or died. And it looked like it. Vasquez stood at the central planning table, a large flat holographic display that showed a three-dimensional map of the local sector. The Karath expanse was marked in gray, a vast empty region between three colored territories. The gentle Whisper's last known coordinates were marked with a red dot. The Grask fleet, based on the signal data, was marked with 14 smaller red dots around it. She stared at the map and did math in her head. Distance to target is approximately 18 light years, said Lieutenant Commander Akafer, her tactical officer, a tall man with a shaved head and a voice that sounded like gravel being poured into a bucket. He stood on the other side of the table, pulling up data on a tablet. At maximum FTL, our fastest ships can make that in approximately 36 hours. The heavier ships, the cruiser and the medical ship, will take closer to 42. That's too long, Vasquez said. The Gras don't sit still. If they finish sorting the captives, they'll split the fleet and scatter to different markets. Once they scatter, we'll never find all of them. Agreed. Ma'am, but physics doesn't care about our timeline. Physics never does. Vasquez leaned on the table and studied the map. What's the fastest we can get a meaningful force to those coordinates? Akupper tapped his tablet. If we send the destroyers ahead at maximum burn and have the cruiser and support ships follow, the destroyers can be on target in 34 hours. The rest of the battle group arrives 6 to 8 hours later. Destroyers alone against 14 Gras. Warships not ideal, ma'am. Not ideal is a polite way of saying suicidal, Akafer. Yes, ma'am. Vasquez straightened up and crossed her arms. She was not a tall woman. 56, compact, went with the kind of build that suggested she had spent a lot of time doing physical things in uncomfortable places, but she had a presence that filled rooms. When she looked at someone, they felt it. All right, she said. Let's talk about what we have. What they had was Anchor Station Thermopolis assigned rapid response force, a small but capable collection of warships kept on standby for exactly this kind of situation. The UEN had learned after the Stellan Hope that keeping forces ready to move on short notice was not optional. It was survival. Vasquez pulled up the fleet roster. The flagship was the UEN Achilles, a Prometheus-class heavy cruiser. It was 240 m long, armored like a fortress, and carried enough firepower to reduce a small moon to rubble. It was not fast, it was not elegant, and it was not subtle. It was a hammer, and it was very good at being a hammer. Its captain was Commander David Park, a quiet careful man who had the unusual talent of being both extremely cautious and extremely aggressive, depending on the situation. Next were the 3 Wolfpack class destroyers, the Yuan Fang of Morning, the Yuan Iron Promise, and the Yuan Razor's Edge. They were small, fast and mean. Where the Achilles was a hammer, the Wolfpacks were knives. They were designed for one thing: getting close to enemy ships and tearing them apart. Each one carried a crew of 60 and enough weapons to fight things 5 times their size. Their captains were young, aggressive, and slightly crazy, which was exactly the kind of person who volunteered to command a Wolfpack. Then there was the Yuan Silent Reckoning, Spectre-class electronic warfare frigate. The Silent Reckoning was the strangest ship in the group. It carried almost no conventional weapons. Instead, it was packed with the most advanced electronic warfare systems in the Yuan fleet: jammers, spoofers, signal disruptors, sensor ghosts, and a dozen other systems whose exact capabilities were classified well above Vasquez's pay grade. Its job was not to fight. Its job was to make sure the enemy could not fight. Its captain was Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka, a small, quiet woman who smiled a lot and whose personnel file contained several sections that were completely blacked out. Finally, there was the Yuan Mercy's Hand, a Hospitaller-class medical and rescue ship. It was the largest ship in the group by volume, but it carried no weapons at all. Instead, it carried 6 surgical theaters, 200 medical beds, a full xenobiology lab, and a crew that included some of the best trauma doctors and combat medics in human space. Its commanding officer was Captain Sarah Aki, a former battlefield surgeon who had once performed an emergency amputation on a Marine during an engagement while the ship she was on was being hit by enemy fire. She had not stopped cutting. And then there were the Hell Divers, Marine Assault Company Hell Divers, officially designated as the 3rd Rapid Assault Company, 1st Marine Expeditionary Regiment, 200 heavy drop shock troopers, under the command of Colonel James Chen. They were the ones who went in when the ships were done shooting and the real work began. Each Marine wore a suit of powered exo armor that turned a human being, already one of the most dangerous predators to ever evolve on any known planet, into something that most species in the galaxy would classify as a natural disaster. Colonel Chen was in the operations center now, standing beside Vasquez and studying the tactical display with a calm, focused expression of a man who was very good at violence and who had long since made peace with that fact. He was in his 50s, lean and hard, with gray hair cut short and hands that were scarred and steady. He had been a Marine for 30 years. He had fought on more worlds than he could easily count. 14 ships, he said, looking at the display. Any intel on crew numbers based on known gross force compositions on each ship carries between 40 and 80 warriors, Akafor said. The command ship could have up to 200. Total estimated hostile force, 800 to 200. Gras against 200 Marines, Chen said. He did not sound worried. He sounded like he was calculating. Your Marines won't be fighting all of them, Vasquez said. The fleet will handle the space engagement. Your job is the boarding action, the ship holding the captives. We need those people alive, Colonel. Understood. Chen looked at the display for another moment, then nodded slowly. We've trained for this. The armor gives us an advantage in close quarters. The Graws are strong, but they are not fast, and they don't adapt well to changing situations. If we can get inside their ship before they organize a proper defense, hey, we can take them apart. Room by room. Can your people handle that? Drop, Vasquez asked. Chen almost smiled. Almost, Commander, my people have been dropping onto hostile ships and hostile planets since before the Graws knew we existed. We can handle the drop. Drop, it was the Hell Divers' signature, and the thing that made every other species in the galaxy look at humans with a mixture of awe and horror. Instead of docking with a target ship or using shuttlecraft like civilized species, the Hell Divers launched themselves at the target in individual drop pods. Each pod was barely large enough for one armored marine. They were fired from the launching ship like projectiles, accelerated to high speed, and slammed into the hull of the target vessel. The pods had hardened penetration tips that could punch through most ship armor, and each marine carried a plasma torch to cut their way through whatever the pod could not break. It was, by any reasonable standard, insane. The pods had minimal shielding, minimal guidance, and the margin for error was measured in centimeters. A pod that hit at the wrong angle would bounce off and send the marine spinning into space. A pod that hit a reinforced section would crumple and kill its occupant. A pod that hit too close to a reactor or a fuel line would explode. Humans did it anyway. They had calculated the risks, decided they were acceptable, and then trained until the death rate dropped to something they considered manageable. The rest of the galaxy called it reckless. Humans called it Tuesday. Vasquez authorized the deployment under Standing Order 71, and the order had been created specifically for situations like this. Confirmed SLVR activity against sentient beings. It gave field commanders the authority to engage without waiting for approval from Earth or the Admiralty. The bureaucrats and politicians had argued about it for months before it was signed. The military had pushed for it with a single unified voice. The Stellan Hope had made the argument for them. The order's official title was Authorization for Immediate Action Against Confirmed Hostile Slaver Elements. Its unofficial name, the one that every sailor and marine knew, was simply the promise that what happened to the Stellan Hope would never happen again. The promise that the next time someone screamed for help, the answer would not be silence. Within 90 minutes of Vasquez reading the distress signal, the battle group was moving. The Achilles undocked from Thermopylae first, its massive engines glowing blue-white as it pulled away from the station and oriented toward the Korath expanse. The three Wolfpack destroyers followed, forming a loose triangle formation around the cruiser. The silent reckoning slipped away last from the main group, almost invisible against the stars, running dark and quiet as it always did. The Mercy's hand brought up the rear, its white hull marked with the red cross that humans used to signify medical ships, a symbol that most alien species did not understand but had learned to associate with humans who would not shoot at you. On the Achilles, Commander Park stood on the bridge and reviewed the tactical plan for the third time. And he was a careful man. He did not like surprises. The plan was straightforward, as the best plans usually were. The silent reckoning would arrive first, using its stealth systems to get close to the grass formation without being detected. It would map the enemy positions, identify the ship, holding the captives, and prepare its electronic warfare systems. When the main force arrived, the reckoning would blind the Graz fleet, kill their sensors, jam their communications, scramble their targeting systems, and the Achilles and the wolf packs would do the rest. Simple, clean, violent, park. Like simple plans, complex plans had too many places where things could go wrong, and things always went wrong. The key was to make the plan simple enough that when things went wrong, and they would, the people executing the plan could adapt without losing the thread. On the Fang of Morning, the lead Wolfpack Lieutenant Commander Aisha Raman stood in her cramped bridge and watched the stars streak past as the ship pushed its FTL drive to the limit. Raman was 31 years old, the youngest Wolfpack commander in the fleet, and she had a reputation for flying her ship the way a motorcycle rider drove through traffic, fast, close, and with a casual disregard for the conventional rules of engagement. She loved her ship, she loved her crew, and she hated slavers with a fury that she kept locked behind a professional smile and precise tactical commands. She had been on the response team that found the Stellan Hope as she had walked through the gutted corridors of the colony transport and seen the things the Graz had left behind, the personal belongings scattered across the deck, the children's shoes, the scratch marks on the walls of the cargo bay where people had tried to claw their way out. She had not slept well since. On the silent reckoning, Lieutenant Commander Tanaka sat in her darkened operations center, surrounded by screens displaying data, streams, and signal analyses, and planned how to make 14 Graz ships go deaf, dumb, and blind at the same moment. She was very good at this. Her ship was designed for it, and she had spent years perfecting the art of electronic warfare, the art of reaching into an enemy's technology and turning it against them. She thought of it as a kind of surgery. You found the nerve and you cut it. When the Graz used a standard communication and sensor system that the UEN had studied extensively after the Stellan Hope, Tanaka knew its weaknesses. She knew its frequencies, its protocols, its failure modes. She had spent months building countermeasures specifically for Graz technology. She had never had the chance to use them. She was looking forward to it, and in the drop bay of the Achilles, 200 Marines checked their armor, tested their weapons, and prepared their drop pods. The bay was loud, the clank of metal, the hiss of pressure seals, the low murmur of conversation. The Marines were professionals. They did not waste energy on bravado or speeches. They checked their gear, reviewed their assignments, and made sure the person next to them was ready. But Sergeant First Class Kofi Asant sat on the bench beside his drop pod and field stripped his rifle for the fourth time. It was a nervous habit, and he knew it was a nervous habit, and he did not care. The repetitive motion calmed his hands and focused his mind. He was 36 years old, born in Accra, Ghana, on a planet that most galactic species would refuse to land on if they understood how dangerous it was. He had been a Marine for 14 years. He had a wife named Adoa and a son Namwa, who was 7 years old. When the Stellan Hope had been taken, 47 of the missing colonists had been children. 7 of them had been the same age as Swami. Asant finished reassembling his rifle, locked the chamber, and set it down. He pulled up the mission briefing on his helmet display and read it one more Time. Here boarding action hostage. Rescue, 40 Vayani captives being held on. Agra slaver ship, rules of engagement. Lethal force authorized against all. Hostile combatants, priority 1. Recover the captives alive. He closed the display and looked around the drop bay at his fellow Marines. They were quiet, focused, ready. Some of them were writing messages to family members. Tradition before every major operation. Some were praying, some were simply sitting still, eyes closed, running through the mission in their minds. None of them had hesitated when the orders came. None of them had asked why they were risking their lives for a species they had never met in a part of space that was not their territory, for people who had not asked specifically for human help. The question had not even occurred to them. Someone was in trouble. Someone had asked for help. That was enough. 40,000 light years away on 100 different worlds, the great civilizations of the galaxy continued their business. The conclave's subcommittee was still deliberating. The Thalmari were reviewing their diplomatic communication for proper formatting. The Rathani had already deleted the signal from their records. 27 species, representing trillions of sentient beings, went about their lives without a second thought for the 40 scientists, slowly dying in the Korath expanse. None of them knew what was coming. None of them understood what they had done. By staying silent, they had created a vacuum, an empty space where help should have been but was not. And nature, as humans like to say, hated a vacuum. Something always rushed in to fill it. In this case, in what rushed in was 5 human warships carrying over 1,000 sailors, soldiers, and doctors, all moving at faster than light speed toward a confrontation that no one had authorized them to seek, and no one could stop them from reaching. The galactic community had been given a test, and they had failed it. They had heard a cry for help, and they had looked away. They had done the reasonable thing, the practical thing, the thing that made sense when you weighed the costs against the benefits. The humans had not done the reasonable thing. Humans rarely did. They had heard the cry, and they had started running toward it without stopping to calculate whether it was worth the trouble. This was, depending on your perspective, either humanity's greatest flaw or its greatest strength. The galaxy was about to find out which. And in the darkness of the Achilles bridge, Commander Park stared at the stars ahead and counted down the hours until they arrived at the Cath expanse. Behind him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency, running system checks and preparing for combat. The ship hummed with the deep, steady vibration of engines pushing at maximum power. Park thought about the signal. He thought about the voice of a Vayani captain, speaking in careful galactic common, asking someone, anyone to help. He thought about how that voice must have sounded in the dark, knowing that the odds of anyone hearing it were almost 0, and sending it anyway. Because what else could she do? What else was there when everything else was gone except to reach out into the void and hope that someone was listening? He thought about the Stellan hope. He thought about the 47 children. He thought about the promise that every person in the UEN had made, spoken or unspoken. After that day, never again. The fleet flew on through the dark. 72 hours had passed since the gentle whisper had been taken, and Captain Ara was learning what it meant to be cargo. The Graz had moved most of the Vellani crew off the gentle Whisper and onto Skies' command ship. The collector's prize, the holding area, was deep in the belly of the vessel. A large cold room with metal walls, metal floor and metal ceiling lit by a single strip of dim yellow light that ran along one wall. The air smelled wrong. It smelled like graz, a sharp chemical odor that reminded Ara of industrial cleaning fluid mixed with something organic and rotten. When the temperature was set for grass comfort, which meant it was far too hot for Vellani, several of her crew had already begun to show signs of heat stress, dull eyes, dry skin, shallow breathing. There were 37 of them left. 3 had died in the initial attack. 3 more had been taken away during the sorting and had not come back. Etha did not know where they were. She tried not to think about it. She failed. Her face hurt. One of the Graz warriors had struck her during the sorting process when she had stepped between him and Sulith. The blow had been casual, almost lazy, a backhand from a limb that was thicker than Athera's entire body. It had knocked her off her feet and sent her sliding across the deck. Her left cheekbone was cracked. She could feel it grinding when she moved her jaw. One of her 4 eyes on that side was swollen shut, the tissue around it dark purple and puffy. She had gotten back up. The Graz had seemed surprised by this, not impressed. The Graz were not capable of being impressed by anything Vellani did, but surprised the way one might be surprised if a piece of furniture suddenly moved on its own. Ithara had stood up, placed herself between the warrior and Sulith again, and stared up at the massive creature with her 3 remaining functional eyes. The warrior had looked at her for a long moment, mandibles clicking thoughtfully, and then moved on to the next crew member. It was not mercy, it was indifference. She was not worth the effort of hitting twice. Now Ara sat against the wall of the holding area with Sulith pressed against her side. It counted her people and tried to hold herself together. Sulith had not spoken since the boarding. The young communications officer sat with her knees drawn up to her chest and her forearms wrapped around them, staring at nothing. Her eyes were open but empty, as if she had gone somewhere inside herself where the grass could not reach. Ithara recognized the look. She had seen it in research papers about trauma responses. She had never expected to see it on someone she knew. Sulith, she said softly, can you hear me? Sulith's eyes moved very slowly to focus on Ithara. She did not speak, but she nodded. It was small. It was something. I need you to stay with me, Ithara said. Can you do that? Another nod. Good, that is good. Ara put one of her arms around the girl's thin shoulders and held her. We sent the signal. Someone may have heard it. We have to stay alive long enough for help to come. Even as she said it, she did not believe it. She had studied enough galactic politics to know how the major powers operated. The conclave would form a committee. The Thulmari would calculate costs. The other species would look away. No one was coming. She was lying to Sulith, and Sulith probably knew she was lying, and she did it anyway because lies were all she had left to give. Above them on the command deck of the Collector's prize, Skis, the Collector was in an excellent mood. He stood at the center of his bridge, a broad, dimly lit space filled with the clicking, chittering sounds of grass. Officers at their stations and reviewed the inventory on a holographic display. 40 Vayani captured, 37 still viable. 3 had been too badly damaged during boarding and had been disposed of. The remaining 3 that had been separated during sorting were being held in a different section of the ship. They were young, healthy, and would fetch premium prices at the markets on Korex Station. The total estimated value of the cargo was approximately 400,000 galactic trade units, not his best haul, but respectable. Vini were always in demand. Their small size made them easy to control. Their forearms made them useful for delicate labor, and their gentle, compliant nature made them popular with buyers who did not want the trouble of breaking more resistant species. SOS was pleased. The operation had gone exactly as planned. His scouts had identified the gentle whisper 3 days before the attack, tracked it into the deep expanse, and waited until it was far from any potential help before striking. The ship had been pathetically easy to disable. No weapons, no shields, no escort. Scientists, they never learned. His only mild concern was the broadband pulse they Vellani had managed to send before the jammers fully engaged. His comms officer had detected it, a single powerful burst lasting less than 2 seconds. It was a distress call. Obviously, SOS was not worried about it. The expanse was vast and empty. Even if the signal reached someone, the response time of any major galactic power would be measured in weeks, not days. By then, SOS and his fleet would be long gone. The Vellani sold and scattered across a dozen markets. He had done this many times before. The galaxy was full of weak species that ventured into dangerous places without protection, and it was full of powerful species that were too comfortable, too bureaucratic, or too indifferent to stop people like SOS from taking them. It was, he reflected, a very profitable arrangement. He was thinking about prices, whether to sell the Vellani as a lot or individually, whether to hold some back for the private auction on Corfax, when his sensor officer interrupted. Commander Longrange, sensors have detected an anomaly. SOS turned his heavy head toward the sensor station. What kind of anomaly? FTL signature, small, very faint at extreme. Sensor range, identification unable to determine at this distance. It could be a merchant vessel, a probe, or natural phenomenon. The signature is unusual. It does not match any known species FTL profile in our database. SOS considered this for a moment. An unknown FTL signature in the middle of the core expanse was mildly unusual, but not alarming. Ships passed through the expanse occasionally. Merchants who wanted to avoid tariffs, smugglers, other raiders, none of them would challenge a fleet of 14 Graz warships. And if it was a patrol from one of the major powers, unlikely given the expanse's unclaimed status. SOS had contingency plans for that too. His fleet could scatter and regroup in a dozen different locations. Monitor it, he said. Report any changes. Yes, Commander. SOS returned to his inventory calculations and thought no more about it. He should have. Anomaly that his sensors had barely detected was the UEN silent reckoning, and it was much, much closer than his instrument suggested. Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka sat in the operations center of the reckoning and watched the Graz fleet through passive sensors only. Her ship was running completely dark. No active sensors, no emissions, no signals of any kind. The reckoning stealth systems absorbed or deflected every form of energy that the Grass sensors could detect, making the ship appear at best as a faint anomaly. That could easily be dismissed as background noise. Tanaka had arrived 12 hours ahead of the main battle group. The reckoning was fast when it wanted to be, and stealth ships did not need to travel in formation. She had dropped out of FTL at extreme range, killed her drive, and drifted in on minimal thrust, using the natural movement of space, debris, and stellar wind to mask her approach. It had taken her 10 hours to close the distance, but she was now positioned approximately 200 km behind the grass formation, sitting in the sensor shadow of a small asteroid, and she could see everything, 14 ships, exactly as the distress signal had described. The command ship, the collector's prize, and was in the center, the largest vessel by far. The remaining 13 ships were arranged in a loose sphere around it, a defensive formation in that the grass used when they were stationary and not expecting trouble. The gentle whisper was still there too, attached to one of the smaller grass ships by docking clamps, being slowly stripped of anything valuable. Tanaka had already identified the ship holding the majority of the captives, the collector's prize itself. Her passive sensors had detected Veilani life signs concentrated in the lower decks of the command ship. Additional Veilani life signs, 3, possibly 4, were detected on a smaller ship on the far side of the formation. She had mapped the grass communication network. Every ship in the formation was linked by a standard Grasscom protocol, a mesh network that provided redundancy and resilience. If one node went down, the others would compensate. It was a good system against most adversaries. It would be difficult to jam effectively. Tanaka had spent 2 years designing countermeasures specifically for this system. She knew every frequency it used, every handshake protocol, every fallback mode. She had built algorithms that could mimic the network's own error correction signal, thus feeding false data into the mesh that would cause the entire network to collapse from the inside out, like a body attacking its own immune system. She had also mapped the Graz sensor systems. Each ship had a primary sensor array and a backup. The primaries were powerful but relied on active scanning. They sent out pulses of energy and read the returns. The backups were passive, designed to detect emissions and energy signatures. Tanaka's plan was to overwhelm the active systems with a flood of false returns while simultaneously blinding the passive systems with a directed burst of electromagnetic noise across every frequency the grass could detect. The result would be total sensory blackout. Every grass ship would lose the ability to see, hear, or communicate. At the same moment, they would be floating blind in the dark and unable to coordinate, unable to target, unable to do anything except panic, and then the rest of the fleet would arrive. Tanaka checked the countdown on her display. The main battle group was 4 hours out. She settled deeper into her chair, watched the Graz fleet drift in peaceful ignorance, and waited. 4 hours, 4 hours. Passed. At 600 hours, Korath expands. Local time, the Achilles and its escorts dropped out of FTL at the edge of the engagement zone, approximately 50,000 km from the grass formation. At that distance, even the grass sensors would detect them within minutes. On the bridge of the Achilles, Commander Park watched the holographic tactical display update in real time as data from the silent reckoning flowed in through tight beam laser link that the grass could not detect to, so he could see every enemy ship, every defensive position, every weakness that Tanaka had identified over the past 12 hours. All ships report readiness, Park said. Responses came quickly, clipped and professional. Fang of Morning ready. Iron Promise ready. Razor's Edge ready. Silent Reckoning in position. Yield package loaded and standing by. Mercy's Hand standing by at safe distance. Hell Divers loaded and locked, came Colonel Chen's voice from the drop bay. 200 Marines in the tubes, ready on your word. Park nodded to himself. He opened the fleet-wide channel and then switched to the broad-spectrum channel, the one that the Grask would hear. This is Commander Park of the United Earth Navy. Battle Group Achilles are transmitting on open frequency to all Grask vessels. In the Karath Expanse, I have been authorized to deliver the following message. He paused, not for dramatic effect, although it had that effect. He paused because he wanted to make sure every word was clear. You are holding sentient beings against their will. This is a violation of the Universal Rights Accord and the United Earth Navy Code of Engagement. You will release all captives immediately. You will power down all weapon systems. You will prepare to be boarded for inspection. You have 15 minutes to comply. This is your only warning. There will not be a second one. He closed the channel and sat back in his chair. On the collector's prize, the message arrived. Like a thunderclap, Skith stood at his bridge and listened to the human's words. With a mixture of amusement and contempt, he pulled up his sensor display and examined the contacts. 5 ships, 5 small ships against his 14. The largest, the one calling itself Achilles, was significant but not overwhelming. The others were tiny, and there was something else at the edge of his sensors, a faint ghost that might be a 6th ship, but it kept flickering in and out of detection, probably a sensor error. 5 ships. Skews laughed and the sound filled the bridge, a harsh, grinding noise that made his officers look up from their stations. Humans, he said. I have heard of them. Deathworlders, aggressive, foolish. He turned to his communications officer. Send a response. One word. The word he sent was a Grask battle can obscenity. Roughly translated, it suggested that the humans should perform an anatomically impossible act and then leave before Skews decided to add them to his inventory on the Achilles. Park read the translated response, nodded once and glanced at the countdown timer. He had started when he delivered the ultimatum. 14 minutes and 12 seconds remaining. He thinks we're bluffing, Akeffer said from the tactical station. He'll learn, Park said. The minutes passed slowly on the grass ships. Warriors moved to battle stations with the casual confidence of a force that outnumbered its enemy nearly 3-1. Weapon systems powered up, shield generators hummed. Skies arranged his fleet into an offensive formation, a forward wedge designed to concentrate firepower on the largest enemy ship and destroy it quickly, be breaking the human formation. It was a solid tactic. Against any of the galaxy's major powers, it would have been effective. The Conclave fought in orderly lines. The Thulmari fought in geometric formations. Every major species in the galaxy fought according to doctrines that were hundreds or thousands of years old, refined and polished until they were elegant, efficient and predictable. Humans have been fighting in space for less than 200 years. Their doctrine was not elegant, it was not polished, it was not predictable. It was built on a single principle that humans had learned on their home world over thousands of years of killing each other. In every environment their planet could offer, the enemy's plan is only a problem if the enemy can execute it. At 14 minutes and 47 seconds, Tanaka pressed a button on every electronic warfare system on the silent reckoning. Fired simultaneously, the grass communication mesh received a flood of false handshake signals that cascaded through the network, causing each node to reject the data from every other node. The mesh collapsed in on itself in less than 3 seconds. 14 ships lost the ability to talk to each other at the same instant. At the same moment, the reckoning's directed EMP arrays hit every grass sensor system, primary and backup, with a focused blast of electromagnetic energy tuned precisely to the frequencies those sensors operated on. Active scanners received a wall of false returns so dense that their processors could not sort real data from garbage. Passive sensors were flooded with noise across every band they could detect. Grask fleet went blind, deaf, mute on the bridge of the collector's prize. Every screen went dark or filled with static. The holographic tactical display dissolved into noise. Officers shouted in confusion, their mandibles clicking in the rapid staccato pattern that indicated alarm. SKUs roared for a status report and received nothing but chaos. At 15 minutes exactly, though, Achilles fired its main batteries. First salvo hit the lead ship of the Graz wedge formation, a heavy raider that had been positioning itself to spearhead the attack on the human cruiser. The shot struck the ship's forward section with the force of a small earthquake. The Graz ship's shields held for approximately 1.5 seconds before collapsing. The second volley punched through the unshielded hull and detonated the ship's forward ammunition magazine. The ship broke apart in a silent expanding cloud of fire and debris. The battle had begun, and the Graz, blind and deaf and cut off from each other, were not ready for what came next. The 3 Wolfpack destroyers, Fang of Morning, Iron Promise and Razor's Edge, hit the grass formation at full speed from 3 different angles. They did not slow down, they did not maintain formation. They dove into the enemy fleet like wolves into a herd of prey, each one picking a target and closing to point blank range before opening fire. The Fang of Morning, under Ramon's command, raced between 2 grass raiders so close that her hull scraped debris from the first ship's explosion. Her point defense cannons, weapons designed to shoot down incoming missiles, were repurposed for close-range combat, pouring streams of tungsten rounds into the Graz ship's weak points at ranges that were measured in meters, not kill 'em at that distance. Even the Graz's armor could not hold. The Graz tried to fight back. Individual ships, cut off from the fleet network, attempted to engage on their own, but without sensors they were firing blind, and without communications they could not coordinate. A Graz ship that turned to engage the Iron Promise exposed its flank to the Razor's Edge. A ship that tried to flee ran directly into the Achilles firing solution. It was not a battle, it was a hunt. In 11 minutes, 7 Graz ships were destroyed or disabled. The remaining 7, those that still had functional engines, broke formation and ran, scattering in different directions at maximum speed. On any other day, a park might have pursued them. Today he had other priorities. One ship had not run. The collector's prize sat in the center of the debris field, its engines damaged by the Achilles opening salvos, its sensors still scrambled by Tanaka's jamming. It was trying to spool its FTL drive. Energy signature was unmistakable. Building wine of power that meant the ship was preparing to jump. Tanaka did not allow it. A single precisely aimed EMP lance from the silent reckoning hit the prize's FTL drive array and killed it. The energy signature died. The ship. When Dark Skew's ship was trapped, and inside it, 37 Vellani captives were still alive. On the Achilles Park opened a channel to the drop bay. Colonel Chen. The target is disabled and stationary. You are cleared for drop in the drop bay. Now Colonel Chen gave a single order. Hell divers launch 200 drop pods fired from the Achilles in a rippling wave, each one carrying a single armored marine, each one aimed at the hull of the collector's prize. They crossed the distance in seconds, a cloud of iron rain falling toward the crippled Graz ship. The Graz saw them coming on. Whatever manual observation systems they had left, they saw 200 small objects approaching at high speed, getting closer, getting bigger, and they understood, perhaps for the first time, that they had made a terrible mistake. They had picked a fight with Deathworlders, and the Deathworlders had come. The first drop pod hit the hull of the collector's prize at 400 ms. Sergeant First Class Kofi Asant felt the impact through every bone in his body, even through the powered exo armor that wrapped him like a second skin. The pod's penetration tip, a cone of hardened tungsten alloy designed to punch through ship armor, slammed into the outer hull, cracked it, and drove through. The inner hull stopped the pod, but barely. The pod was embedded in the ship like a nail driven into wood, half inside and half outside, surrounded by twisted metal and sparking wires. Asant's training took over before his conscious mind caught up. He hit the emergency release. The pod split open like a seed pod and he was out, boots on the inner hull surface, rifle up, scanning his immediate surroundings. Through the heads-up display inside his helmet, the display painted the world shades of green and gray, highlighting structural elements, heat signatures, and potential threats. He was in a corridor where the lights were out. The EMP had killed most of the ship's secondary systems, along with the primary ones. Emergency lighting cast dim red pools every few meters, leaving long stretches of darkness between them. The air was thick and hot, filled with a sharp chemical smell that his suit sensors identified as grass. Atmospheric preference, smoke drifted from somewhere deeper in the ship, probably from fires started by the battle damage. His radio crackled. The short-range tactical network was active. The Marines used a system that operated on frequencies the grass jammers could not touch, encrypted with protocols that would take a supercompute years to break. Third squad. Sound off, Asant said. Asant, pod 2. I'm in. That was Corporal Diaz. His second. Pod 3 in. Minor hull breach near my entry point, sealed with foam. Private Okinquo, pod 4 in. I'm 1 deck above you, Sarge. I can see a stairwell. Private First Class Leyu, 4 for 4. Good. Asant checked the tactical display on his helmet across the ship. Other squads were reporting in. Of the 200 Marines who had launched, 187 had made successful penetrations. 8 pods had hit reinforced sections and failed to breach. 3 had hit at bad angles and deflected. 2 were not responding, which meant the Marines inside were either dead or their communications had been damaged. 187 Marines inside a ship with an estimated 800 to 1,000 Grask warriors. The math was not in their favor then. Again, the math rarely was, and the Marines had something the Grask did not: powered exo armor, night vision, thermal imaging, coordinated communications, and 2 years of cold, patient fury. Colonel Chen's voice came over the command channel, calm and steady as always. All squads, this is Hell Diver Actual. Situation update: the target ship has been disabled. Primary and backup power are offline. The GRAs are operating on emergency systems only. They have no sensors, no comms, and no lights except emergency strips. We have full tactical advantage. Priority 1 is the main holding area, lower deck 7 center section. That is where the majority of captives are located. All squads converge on that position. Secondary objective: 3 to 4 additional captives are being held on the ship's upper decks. Section 12, Alpha and Bravo squads handle that. Everyone else move to deck 7. Watch your targets. The captives are Velani, small F4 arms, blue skin. Do not shoot the blue people. Chin out. Asani almost smiled at that last part. Almost. Third squad on me, he said. We're heading down. They moving through the interior of a Graz warship was like moving through the inside of a giant insect. The corridors were built for creatures 8 ft tall and 4 t wide, so there was plenty of room for the armored humans, but the architecture was wrong in ways that were hard to describe. The walls were curved and rigged, covered in a material that looked like dried resin. The floors were textured with small bumps and grooves that the grass used for traction with their clawed feet. The air tasted wrong, even through the suit's filters. Everything was built at a scale and in a style that told the human brain on some deep level that this was not a place made for things like them. Asant's squad moved in a diamond formation. Asant on point, Diaz and Akinquo on the flanks, Lu covering the rear. They communicated with hand signals and short tactical bursts on the radio. Their boots made almost no sound on the resin floor. The armor's noise dampening systems absorbed the impact of each step. In the darkness with their black armor and closed helmets, they were shadows, heavily armed shadows. They encountered the first Grask 30 seconds in. The warrior came around a corner 10 m ahead, moving fast, a weapon in 2 of its 6 limbs. It was huge, easily 8 t tall, its kitten plates gleaming dull brown in the emergency lighting. Its compound eyes caught the faint light and reflected it back in 1,000 tiny points like a cluster of stars. The Graz saw them for a moment, maybe a full second. It froze. It had never seen anything like the figure standing in its corridor. They were the wrong shape, the wrong size, and they moved with a fluid alien grace that did not belong on a Graz ship. They looked like something out of a nightmare, dark, faceless, armored with weapons that glowed faintly in the red light. The Graz raised its weapon. Asante shot it twice. In the center mass, the round's high velocity tungsten penetrators punched through the kitten armor plate and into the body beneath. The Graz staggered, took 1 step back, and started to raise its weapon again. Asante shot it a third time in the head. It fell. He stepped over the body and kept moving, behind him. His squad followed without breaking stride. There was no hesitation, no horror, no triumph. It was simply the job. The Graz was between them and the captives. Now it was not. They reached a stairwell, a wide spiraling ramp, designed for Graz feet, and started down. The deeper they went into the ship, the hotter it became, and the thicker the air grew. The ship's environmental systems were fighting to maintain Graz-preferred conditions on emergency power, which meant the lower decks were turning into a sauna. Inside the armor, the cooling systems hummed louder, keeping the Marines at a comfortable temperature. The Graz, operating without the benefit of their own ship's full life support, would be uncomfortable and sluggish. Another small advantage: on the deck above, Alpha Squad encountered a group of 6 Grask warriors who had organized themselves into a defensive line across a wide corridor, and the Graz had used cargo containers and structural debris to build a rough barricade, and they crouched behind it with weapons ready, compound eyes scanning the darkness. It was a reasonable defensive position against most boarding parties in the galaxy. It would have held. Alpha Squad's pointman saw the barricade on thermal imaging before the Grass saw him. He reported the position. Alpha Squad's leader, Sergeant Torres, assessed the situation in 3 seconds. Flashbangs 2, then move, she said. 2 grenades sailed over the barricade and detonated in rapid succession. They were designed for use against species with compound eyes. The flash was not a single burst, but a rapid strobe pattern that overloaded multifaceted visual processing. The Graz behind the barricade reared back, mandibles open, claws scraping at their eyes, and the sound component hit a frequency range that disrupted Graz equilibrium organs, making them stagger. Alpha Squad came over the barricade before the last echo of the grenades faded. 6 Graz, disoriented and half-blind against 8 armored humans moving with practice coordination. It was over in 4 seconds. Throughout the ship, similar encounters played out in every corridor, every compartment, every stairwell. The Graz thought they were not cowards. Whatever else could be said about them, they were warriors, and they did not surrender easily. They fought with weapons, with claws, with their own bodies. A Grask warrior charged Private Atrix of 7 Squad, hitting him at full speed, and the impact sent the Marine flying backward into a wall hard enough to dent the armor's back plate. Atrix got up, shot the Graz 4 times, and kept moving. His back would hurt for weeks. He would not mention it, but the Graz were fighting blind, deaf, and without coordination. Each group of warriors was isolated, unable to communicate with the others, unable to know where the attackers were until they appeared in the corridor like ghosts. The humans, by contrast, were a single organism. Every squad connected, every piece of information shared, every movement coordinated through the tactical network. When a Grass group was spotted, the nearest squads could converge on it from multiple directions, surrounding and overwhelming the defenders before they could organize. It was a system that humans had been perfecting since before they had ever left their planet. Small groups of highly trained individuals connected by communication technology, a moving independently but thinking collectively. They had used it in their world wars, their urban battles, their counterterrorism operations, their peacekeeping missions. They had refined it over centuries of conflict against the most dangerous predator they had ever faced, each other. The Gras had never encountered anything like it. On Deck 7, a Santee squad reached the main holding area. The door was sealed, a heavy blast door designed to contain cargo. The Grask had locked the captives inside, probably as a precaution when the attack began. Asant examined the door and found the locking mechanism, a simple magnetic bolt system powered by the ship's emergency grid. Leu cut the power to this door, he said. Hilu pulled a small device from her belt, a portable induction cutter, and placed it against the wall beside the door frame over the spot where the power conduit ran behind the wall. She activated it. The cutter hummed and the metal wall glowed orange. As the conduit behind it melted, the magnetic bolt lost power and released. The door slid open. The room beyond was large and dark. Emergency lighting provided a faint red glow that barely reached the center. The air was thick with heat and the smell of too many bodies in too small a space, and in the dim light Asant could see them. Velani, dozens of them, small blue-skinned figures huddled together in groups pressed against the walls, clinging to each other. They were thin, dehydrated, some of them visibly injured. Their large dark eyes reflected the red emergency light in the faint glow of Asant's armor systems. When the door opened, they flinched, all of them. At once, a ripple of fear that ran through the room like a wave. Some of them whimpered, a few pressed harder against the walls as if trying to push themselves through the metal and disappear. They thought the grass had come back. Asante stopped in the doorway. He looked at the room full of terrified people who had no reason to believe that anything coming through that door was there to help them. He understood what he must look like to them, a tall, dark figure in full armor, faceless behind a sealed helmet, carrying a weapon, stepping out of the darkness. He did not look like a rescuer. He looked like another monster. He did something that was not in any tactical manual. He lowered his rifle. He clipped it to the magnetic mount on his back. He held up his empty hands, both of them open, palms forward, the universal gesture of harmlessness that evolution had somehow programmed into species across the galaxy. And then he knelt. He knelt on the deck of the Gras ship, bringing himself down to their level, making himself smaller, less threatening, and he reached up and pressed the release on his helmet. The seal hissed. He lifted the helmet off and held it under one arm. His face was exposed, dark brown skin, shaved head, wide brown eyes that were soft and kind, despite the lines of exhaustion around them, a thin scar across his jaw from an old injury. He was breathing the grass air now, hot, chemical, unpleasant, and he did not flinch. He looked across the room and found the one Villani who was looking back at him without flinching. She was sitting against the far wall, her face swollen and bruised, one eye sealed shut, forearms wrapped protectively around a smaller Villani beside her. Despite everything, the injuries, the fear, the exhaustion, there was something in her remaining eyes that Asant recognized. It was the look of someone who was still fighting, even when there was nothing left to fight with. The captain, he spoke. His galactic common was accented but careful. He had studied the language during the transit, practicing the phrases he thought he might need. Captain, my name is Kofi. I am a sergeant in the United Earth Navy. Marines, you sent a signal. We heard you. We are here to take you home. You are safe now. For a long moment nothing happened. The room was silent except for the hum of emergency systems and the distant muffled sounds of combat deeper in the ship, where other Marine squads were still clearing Gra's resistance. Then Captain Athara made a sound. It was small at first, a low shaking exhale. That could have been a breath or a laugh, or the beginning of a scream. It built, slowly rising from somewhere deep in her chest, and when it finally broke free, it was none of those things. It was a sob, a single ragged sob that contained 72 hours of fear, pain, despair, and the sudden overwhelming realization that it was over. She wept, and beside her, Sulith began to weep. And then others, one by one across the room, the Vini crew of the Gentle Whisper began to cry, the deep shaking tears of people who had given up hope, and then against all reason, or had it given back. Asant stayed where he was, kneeling, hands open, face exposed. He did not rush them, he did not bark orders or hurry them to their feet. He waited because he understood that these people needed a moment to feel safe, a moment to stop being cargo and become people again, and that moment was more important than any tactical timeline. Behind him, his squad stood in the corridor and guarded the door, weapons up, facing outward. They could hear the crying through the open door. None of them spoke. Private Lou blinked several times rapidly behind her helmet visor and was glad that no one could see her face. After a minute, maybe two, Ether collected herself. She wiped her eyes with two of her 4 hands, took a shaking breath, and looked at Asant. How? She asked. Her voice was raw and broken. Or how are you here? We sent the signal to everyone. No one answered. We answered, Asant said simply. But you are. She struggled for the word. You are the Deathworlders, the restricted species. The galactic databases say you are dangerous. Asant looked at her for a moment, then he smiled. It was a warm, tired smile that reached his eyes and softened his entire face. Yeah, he said, we are, but not to you, never to you. He stood up slowly and held out hand. Can you walk, Captain? We have a medical ship standing by. Our doctors are ready for your crew. Athara looked at his hand. It was large, dark, calloused and scarred, the hand of a warrior offered in gentleness. She reached out with one of her forearms and took it. His fingers closed around hers with careful, precise pressure, firm enough to support, gentle enough not to hurt. She could feel the strength in that hand. It was enormous, the kind of strength that could crush bone, and it held her like she was made of glass. He helped her to her feet. Beside her, Sulith stood up on her own, wiping her eyes, and looked at the armored figure with an expression of bewildered amazement. Come on, Asanti said. Let's get out of here. He put his helmet back on, retrieved his rifle, and led the Villani crew out of the holding area. His squad formed around them, 2 Marines in front, 2 behind, the Villani in the center. They moved through the corridors of the Graz ship, past the bodies of fallen warriors, past the scorch marks and bullet holes, and the evidence of the battle that had raged through the vessel's arteries. The Villani stared at the fallen Graz as they passed. These were the creatures that had terrorized them, beaten them, sorted them like animals, and here they lay still and silent, brought down by the people walking beside them. The Villani looked at their rescuers, the dark armored figures moving with smooth, easy confidence through a ship full of dead monsters, and tried to understand. What kind of species could do this? What kind of world produced people who could fight like this and then kneel down and speak softly to strangers in a dark room? They did not understand, not yet. But they would. The rest of the ship was being cleared. Other squads had secured additional sections, and the sounds of combat were growing fainter as the Graz resistance collapsed. Some Grask warriors surrendered, dropping their weapons and pressing themselves flat on the deck in the Graz gesture of submission. They were secured with restraints and left under guard. Others fought to the end and were dealt with accordingly. On the upper decks, Alpha and Bravo squads found the three separated Vale Lanny captives. They were in a small room that had been prepared for special handling, a term that Asant did not want to think about too carefully. The three Balani were terrified but alive and unharmed beyond the psychological damage. Alpha squads medic gave them water and wrapped them in thermal blankets, and they were escorted to join the rest of the crew. In total, the boarding action lasted 47 minutes from the first pod impact to the last Graz resistance being neutralized. 187 Marines had boarded the ship. 184 walked out. 3 Marines had been killed, 2 by Graz weapons fire in close quarters, and 1 when a section of ceiling collapsed on her during a firefight. 11 Marines were wounded, 2 of them seriously. 40 Vanni had been captured, 37 were recovered alive, 3 had been killed by the Graz before the humans arrived. Their names were Poor, Vashan and Tak. Either would carry those names for the rest of her life. Mercy's hand moved into position beside the collector's prize, extending docking tubes to transfer the rescued crew. Captain Sarah Akoyo and her medical teams were ready. They had spent the entire transit studying Velani physiology, preparing treatment protocols, adjusting their equipment for forearmed patients with different blood chemistry and different bone structure. The Velani were brought aboard the Mercy's hand one at a time, carefully. Gently, each one was met by a human medic who spoke to them in Galactic Common, explained what was happening, and asked for their consent before touching them. The medics moved with a softness that seemed impossible from the same species that had just torn through a Graz warship like a storm. Either was the last to board. She stopped at the docking tube entrance and looked back at the collector's prize, the ship that had been her prison, floating dark and broken against the stars. Then she looked at Asant, who stood beside the tube in his armor, helmet under his arm, watching her with those quiet, kind eyes. Sergeant Kofi, she said. Yes. Captain, thank you. She said it in her own language first, then in Galactic Common, and then she tried to say it in the human language she had heard the Marines using among themselves. She got the pronunciation wrong, but the intent was clear. Thank you, Asanti nodded. You're welcome, Captain. Go get some rest. You've earned it. She turned and walked through the docking tube into the Mercy's hand, into warmth and light in the hands of people who would heal her. Behind her the door closed and the darkness of the Graz ship was gone. In the drop bay of the Achilles, the surviving Marines sat on their benches and began the long, slow process of coming down from combat. They removed their armor piece by piece and stacked it carefully. They cleaned their weapons. They checked on each other, not with words necessarily, but with looks, with nods, with a hand on a shoulder. 3 empty benches, 3 sets of armor that would not be worn again, 3 Marines who had gone into the dark and not come back. Their names were added to a list that was already too long, and their friends sat in silence and remembered them. Asant sat on his bench and pulled up a photo on his personal device. His wife Adoa and his son Wami standing in front of their house in Accra on a warm day. Smiling at the camera, Wami Kwame was holding a soccer ball and grinning with the gap-to smile of a 7-year-old who did not know that the galaxy was full of monsters. Asant looked at the photo for a long time, then he closed it, put the device away, and went to write letters to the families of the 3 Marines who had died. That was his job too, all of it was his job. Allah outside the ship in the cold silence of the Korath expanse, the wreckage of 7 Gras ships drifted among the stars. Collector's prize hung dark in powerless, a hollow shell. The gentle whisper was still attached to its captor by docking clamps, battered but intact. And the UN battle group sat in the middle of it all. 5 small ships in a sea of debris, quiet and watchful. The battle was over, but the war, one that would be fought with words and politics and the slow, grinding machinery of galactic civilization, was just beginning. The medical bay of the UN Mercy's hand was warm, clean, and smelled like disinfectant. After 3 days in the stinking hold of a grass slaver ship, Captain Ara thought it was the most beautiful place she had ever been. See, she lay on a bed that had been adjusted for her body, lowered, narrowed with supports for her forearms, and a pillow shaped to accommodate the structure of a Vellani skull. A human doctor had examined her within minutes of her arrival, running a handheld scanner over her body with the focused calm of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The doctor's name was Lieutenant Chen, no relation to the Marine Colonel, she had explained with a small smile, and she had treated Ara's cracked cheekbone, her swollen eye, her dehydration, and the dozen minor injuries she had accumulated during her captivity with a speed and competence that left Athara speechless. Your bone structure is similar to what we see in amphibian species on our home world, Lieutenant Chen had said as she applied a regeneration patch to the cracked cheekbone. Not identical, but close enough that our standard bone repair protocols work with minor adjustments. You'll need to keep this patch on for 48 hours. It will itch. Try not to scratch it. Ira had stared at the doctor. You know how to treat Vellani injuries. We studied your species medical literature during the transit. Here, your government publishes very detailed physiological databases. Our xenobiology team spent 30 hours preparing treatment protocols. Chen paused and gave a thorough look that was somehow both professional and kind. We wanted to be ready. They had prepared. They had spent hours they could have used to rest, to sleep, to prepare for battle, studying the biology of a species they had never treated, designing medical protocols from scratch, when adjusting their equipment to handle patients with forearms and different blood chemistry and different bone density. They had done this because they knew that when they arrived there would be people who needed help, and they intended to be able to provide it. Athara lay in the bed and tried to understand the kind of species that would do that. Around her the medical bay was full of her crew, 37 Bane all, receiving treatment. Some had physical injuries, broken bones, cuts, bruises, the marks of grass handling. Others had No visible injuries, but sat in there. Beds with empty eyes and shaking hands. Staring at walls or ceilings, trapped. Inside memories that would not let them go. The human medics treated both kinds of wounds with equal seriousness. Physical injuries received medicine and patches and surgery where needed, moi. Psychological injuries received quiet conversations, warm blankets, gentle voices, and the simple, powerful comfort of someone sitting beside you and saying you are not alone. Sulith was in the bed next to Athara. The young communications officer had not spoken a word since the rescue. She lay on her side, curled into a small ball, her forearms wrapped around herself. A human medic, a large bearded man named Petty Officer Graves, who had hands the size of dinner plates and a voice as soft as cotton, sat in a chair beside her bed and talked to her. He did not demand that she respond. He did not push her to engage. He simply sat there and talked in slow, gentle, galactic comment about nothing in particular. He talked about his daughter back on Earth, who was 5 years old and loved to draw pictures of horses. He talked about the time he had tried to cook a traditional Earth meal called lasagna in the ship's galley and had set off 3 fire alarms. He talked about the stars visible from the observation deck and how different they looked depending on where you were in the galaxy. Sulith did not respond, but after an hour her body uncurled slightly. After 2 hours her eyes focused on Graves's face. After 3 hours she whispered a single word in Vanny that the translator rendered as more. Graves smiled and kept talking. On the 4th day after the rescue, Commander Lena Vasquez came aboard the Mercy's Hand to visit the Velani crew. She came alone, without guards or aides, wearing a clean uniform and carrying a data pad. She found Athara sitting up in her bed eating a bowl of nutrient paste that the human doctors had formulated to match Velani dietary needs. It did not taste like home, but it was warm and filling and given freely, and that made it the best meal Athara had ever eaten. Vasquez pulled up a chair and sat down beside the bed. For a moment the two of them simply looked at each other. 2 women from very different worlds, one tall and dark and hardened by 20 years of military service, the other small and blue and soft-spoken, a scientist who had never expected to see the inside of a warship. "How are you feeling, Captain?" Vasquez asked. "Better," Ira said. "Your doctors are very skilled. They're the best we've got. If anyone can patch your crew up, it's Akke's people." There was a pause. Ira sat down her spoon and looked at the human commander with the careful, a searching gaze of a scientist examining a specimen she did not fully understand. "Commander Vasquez, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead. Why did you come?" Vasquez blinked. She tilted her head slightly as if the question did not quite make sense. "You sent a distress signal. You were in danger." We responded. "Yes, but why?" "We sent that signal to everyone, to every species in range. We have since confirmed this. Our signal was received by 27 different civilizations. The Conclave received it. The Thmari received it. The Rathani received it. All of them heard us. None of them came." Athara's voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "You are the smallest power in this region of space. You have been among the stars for less than 200 years. You have no treaty with the Velani. You have no obligation to us. You owe us nothing, and yet you send a fleet. You risked your people's Lives, 3 of your soldiers died, she paused. Why? Vasquez was quiet for a long time. She leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling of the medical bay where the lights hummed softly behind their panels. When she spoke, her voice was different, quieter, less official, more personal. 2 years ago, a ship called the Stellan Hope was taken by the Graz. It was a colony transport, carrying civilians, families, children. By the time we got there, the ship was empty. Everyone was gone. 216 people. We never found them. She looked at Athara. 47 of them were children. Athara said nothing. She could see the weight of those numbers in the human's eyes. Weight that had not diminished with time, that sat behind the commanders. Professional composure like a stone at the bottom of a river. After the Stellan Hope, we made a decision, Vasquez continued. Not a political decision, not a strategic decision, a human decision. We decided that the next time someone called for help, we would be there. Period. No calculations, no committees, no jurisdictional analysis. Someone calls, we go. That's the rule. That's the promise. The promise repeated. Yeah, Standing Order 71. We call it the promise. Vasquez's jaw tightened slightly. We called it that because promises mean something to us. Where we come from, if you say you'll be there, you be there, and if you fail, you don't make excuses. You make sure it doesn't happen again. She looked at Athara, and her dark eyes were fierce and tired, and something else, something that looked like grief and love twisted together into a thing that had no name. You asked why we came, Captain. I'll tell you. We came because you asked. That's it. That's the whole reason. You asked for help, and we heard you, and we came. That's what we do. Ethra stared at her. That is not what other species do. No. Vasquez said, it's not. That's their problem. The news of the rescue spread slowly at first, and then all at once. It began with the after-action report, which Commander Park submitted through standard UE channels to the Admiralty on Earth. The report was thorough, professional, and classified. It was supposed to stay classified. It did not. No one ever officially determined who uploaded the complete report to the Galactic Open Information Exchange, the publicly accessible database that served as the galaxy's equivalent of a shared library. The report included everything: the distress signal, the 27 species that had received it, and the 0 that had responded, the deployment of the UN battle group, the engagement with the Graz fleet, the boarding action, and the rescue of the Velani crew. It included the names of the 3 Marines who had died. It included Captain Ara's testimony given from her hospital bed on the Mercy's hand, in which she described her captivity, the rescue, and the answer Vasquez had given to her question. The report went viral in the galactic information ecosystem, where data traveled at faster than light speeds through relay networks that connected billions of worlds. The story of the gentle whisper spread like a fire in dry grass. Within days it had been read, translated, discussed, and debated on every major world in the quadrant. The reactions were varied and revealing. The conclave of enlightened worlds responded first, because the conclave always responded first to things that made them look bad. The conclave spokesperson released a statement explaining that the Emergency Response Committee had been actively reviewing the distress signal when the human intervention occurred, and that a response force would have been dispatched within the standard review time frame. When pressed on what the standard review time frame was, the spokesperson said 10 standard days, and when it was pointed out that the Villani crew would almost certainly have been sold and scattered within 72 hours, the spokesperson declined further comment. The Thari hegemony issued a statement expressing deep satisfaction at the safe recovery of the Villani crew and noting that their own diplomatic efforts had contributed to the broader environment of stability that made such operations possible. No one with any knowledge of the situation believed this, but the Thulari did not expect to be believed. They expected to be on the record. The Rithani collective said nothing. They were very good at saying nothing. But the real response, the one that mattered, came not from the great powers but from the small ones. Across the galaxy there were hundreds of species like the Villani, small, peaceful, either technologically capable but militarily weak. They were scientists, artists, traders, farmers, builders. They populated the gaps between the great empires, living in the spaces that the powerful species did not bother to claim. They had always known, on some level, that they were vulnerable, that the galaxy's great powers would not protect them, that if something bad happened to them in the wrong place at the wrong time, they would be on their own. They had accepted this because there was no alternative. The conclave was too slow. The Tolari only helped if there was profit in it. The Rathani did not care. There was no one to call, no one who would answer, no one who would come. Until now, the Polari, a species of small burrowing mammals who lived on 3 colony worlds in the outer rim, one who sent a diplomatic delegation to the nearest human outpost. The delegation carried a formal request for a mutual defense consultation. The Polari ambassador, a round furry creature about the size of a human child, presented the request with great ceremony, and then, in a moment that was not part of the official program, asked the human officer who received it, "Is it true? If we call, will you really come?" The officer, a young lieutenant who had not been briefed on how to answer this question, looked at the Polari ambassador and said, "Yes, sir. We will." The Poli ambassador stared at the lieutenant for a long moment, then very quietly began to purr. Lieutenant later learned that purring was the Pori expression of profound relief. The Deathani, an aquatic species that lived in pressurized habitats on ocean worlds, Shu sent a trade proposal to Earth. The Yunketh, a crystalline species that communicated through light patterns, requested a cultural exchange program. The Melari, a species of winged beings who had lost 2 colony ships to raiders in the past decade without any response from the galactic community, asked for military advisors to help train a self-defense force. One by one, the small species of the galaxy began turning their eyes toward humanity, not because humans were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. They turned toward humanity because humanity had done the one thing that no other power in the galaxy had been willing to do. They had shown up inside the Conclave's headquarters in a building that orbited a star at the center of Conclave space and housed the bureaucratic machinery of 200 species. The classified internal memo was circulated among senior diplomatic staff. The memo was written by the Bureau of Strategic Assessment, the department responsible for evaluating long-term threats and opportunities. It was marked with the highest level of classification available, which meant Practice that it was leaked within a week. The memo was 17 pages long. It analyzed human military capability, human psychology, human social structures, human history, and human cultural patterns. It examined the rescue of the Gentle Whisper in exhaustive detail and compared it to other human military operations, human disaster responses, and human behavioral patterns going back centuries. It consulted xenopsychologists, military analysts, historians, and sociologists. The conclusion was contained in a single paragraph on the final page. The paragraph was later quoted in diplomatic briefings, academic papers, news reports, and barroom arguments across the galaxy. It became perhaps the most famous single paragraph in galactic diplomatic history. It read, "It is the assessment of this Bureau that the primary strategic significance of the Korath Expanse incident is not military but psychological. Humanity's intervention demonstrates a behavioral pattern that has no parallel among known spacefaring species, an instinctive non-transactional response to distress signals from unaffiliated entities. Analysis of human history and culture suggests that this is not an anomaly but a consistent species-level trait. Humans do not evaluate rescue operations on the basis of strategic value, economic return, or political advantage. They evaluate them on the basis of need. Once this Bureau therefore concludes that humanity's greatest strategic asset is not their military capability, their aggression, adaptation, or their death world physiology, it is that when someone screams for help, they actually come. The implications of this for the galactic balance of power are in the assessment of this Bureau profound and irreversible. Profound and irreversible. The memo was filed, the committees were formed, subcommittees were assembled, the conclave would debate the implications. For years, they would produce reports, hold conferences, draft resolutions. They would do what they always did: talk. Meanwhile, the small species of the galaxy kept sending their delegations to human space. They kept asking their question, and the humans kept giving their answer: if you call, we will come. Months after the rescue, a captain returned to active duty. Her cheekbone had healed, her eye had healed, the nightmares had not healed, and probably never would, but she had learned to live alongside them the way humans lived alongside the dangerous creatures of their home world, with respect, with caution, and without letting them stop her from doing what needed to be done. She had learned that from the humans too. She was assigned to a new ship, a Velani research vessel, named the First Light, and she requested specifically and repeatedly that her first mission be in partnership with a human escort vessel. The Velani government, still processing the diplomatic implications of the rescue, granted the request. The escort ship was the UEN Iron Promise, one of the Wolfpack destroyers that had fought in the core expanse. Its captain, Lieutenant Commander Aisha Raman, met Athara at the docking port when the First Light arrived at the rendezvous point. Raman was younger than Athara had expected, barely 30, with sharp eyes, a quick smile, and hands that moved with the nervous energy of someone who was always thinking 3 steps ahead. Captain Ara, Raman said, extending a hand. The human greeting gesture. It's an honor to meet you. Athara took the hand. She had practiced the gesture. The honor is mine, Commander. You fought to save My crew, we all did, Captain, that's the job. They stood for a moment, two women. From two very different worlds connected by an event that had changed the course of galactic history. Then Raman grinned. A bright, fierce, slightly wild grin. That made her look even younger, so. She said, but where are we going, Ara? Smiled back. It was the first real smile she had managed since the gentle whisper into the deep. There are things out there worth studying, Commander, and this time I intend to come home. You will, Raman said. I guarantee it. Inara believed her because humans made promises and humans kept them. It was the simplest thing in the galaxy and the rarest and the most powerful. Far away at Anchor Station, Thermopylae, Commander Lena Vasquez sat in her office and worked through the mountain of paperwork that the rescue had generated, reports to file, commendations to write, requisitions to submit, diplomatic inquiries to answer. The galaxy had questions and someone had to provide the answers, and that someone was apparently her. She finished the last report at 200 hours, was signed it with a tired hand and sent it off. Then she stood up, stretched her back, and walked to the small observation window. In her office, the stars were bright and cold and infinite the way they always were. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was changing slowly, clumsily, in the way that galaxies always changed. Not through grand declarations or dramatic turning points, but through small acts accumulated over time that gradually shifted the balance of what was possible and what was expected. One rescue, one fleet, one promise kept. It was not enough to change everything. It was enough to start. Vasquez poured herself a cup of recycled coffee, still terrible, still the only coffee available, and took a sip. She set the cup down, looked at the stars one more time, and went back to work. Somewhere out in the dark, another signal was already traveling, a faint voice calling out from nowhere, asking if anyone was there, if anyone could hear, if anyone would come. And at Anchor Station, Thermopylae, at Outpost Echo 7, at listening posts and relay stations scattered across the edge of human space, the receivers were on. Someone was always listening, and when the call came, when it came, not if the answer would be the same answer it had always been since the first human had heard the first cry in the first dark night on a dangerous world circling a small yellow star. We hear you. We are coming.